Hello, everybody. David Wallach here, New View Safety Coach, and welcome to another episode of the Shut Up David series, where hopefully I stop waffling and we get to hear from guests from all over the world. Please welcome Ron Ferris. He's a distinguished author and captivating keynote speaker with a wealth of experience in human and organizational performance and high reliability organization domains. So you can see why we have him on this channel here. HOP obviously being a New View safety methodology, and HRO as well brings a lot of skills and a lot of capability to the table for organizations that are looking to move the dial a little bit further. Ron has dedicated his career to supporting a diverse range of high-risk industries. His work involves the thorough analysis of operational data and empowering frontline workers, line managers, and leaders. He's an expert in safeguarding assets through the implementation of proven risk management methodologies and error prevention and mitigation strategies. Notably, Ron played a pivotal role in developing the acclaimed Critical Steps publication, which we're going to dive into in detail today, which has now been transformed into a comprehensive 4-hour video-based training course. His contributions to the field are a testament to his commitment to excellence and safety. Please welcome to the stage Ron Ferris. Ron, good morning and good evening for you. I think it's good evening for you, isn't it, over there?
Good evening, yes. Thank you, David. I appreciate you having me on.
Really no worries.
This interview.
No worries at all. Thank you for agreeing to come on and talk about your experience in this field, especially our audience is very interested in aspects such as HOP, HRO, all those kind of areas. So why don't we start off, Ron, with giving an introduction to yourself, a bit of a timeline as to how you got to where you are now, and the listeners and the watchers, can understand who they're listening to.
You bet. So my basic background, I started in 1981 in the United States Nuclear Navy program. I spent 8 years in the Navy. I qualified on 4 different nuclear power plants in the Navy, all different types, submarine, aircraft carrier designs. And then I finished up my tour here in Idaho, where I currently live, at the Naval Reactors Facility. I had completed 8 years total, and decided that was enough time away from the family, going out to sea and everything. But I learned a lot from the nuclear Navy. Admiral Rickover had a very distinct approach to operational excellence, and a lot of what we actually teach in human organizational performance and the principles of high reliability organizations actually come from that nuclear Navy background. And I credit a lot of that to Rickover and his foresight to see where this industry needed to go. He was a forefather to a lot of things, both in the Navy and in the civilian world. What I think is most interesting is that a lot of what I would call them the HOP tools or error mitigation tools, we didn't have names for them in the Navy, but we did most of them. That's what, we didn't formalize it. We didn't even write them down. We just trained that way. We did those things. We did peer checking. We did independent verifications. We did self-checking. We did concurrent verification. We did a lot of these verification practices. We used 3-way communication. That's the way we communicated critical data and information across our sound-powered phones that we used, or headsets. So none of this was new to me, but it was so refreshing when I got introduced to the HOP principles, practices, and especially the practices. So I kind of want to give a lot of credit to the nuclear Navy and kind of laying that out. A lot of the folks in the commercial nuclear industry in the United States actually have a background like mine in the commercial, in the Navy nuclear program. They got out after 6 years, 8 years, 20 years, whatever, and then went to work in the commercial nuke industry or other industries as well. Yeah. After 8 years in the Navy, I went to work for Argon National Laboratory. There's Argon East and Argon West. We were the West division, and we had a experimental breeder reactor. It's a fast sodium reactor. It's a very interesting design. You could actually make more fuel than you were actually using. To me, I always give the analogy, it's like driving down the road and watching your fuel gauge fill up and you started at the halfway mark. So,
wow.
Yeah. It was,
So it's a positive, but actually, all right, okay. So I thought that's crazy.
it is.
I couldn't even wrap my head around it.
Yeah, I'd love to spend a lot of time talking about it because I think it's such an interesting design. Actually, Bill Gates is working on a design as well. He's got actually a couple designs out there. And I was shortly involved in one of his reactor control room designs when I went on with my future career. I'll kind of get to that. So at Argon, I qualified as a reactor operator, a senior reactor operator, fuel handler. We did a lot of things. It was kind of a small facility, and today we would call it a small modular reactor. The design of that is it's the economy of scale used to be the way we looked at things. The bigger, the cheaper things got. So cheaper megawatts building a large plant. And then kind of the new view of nuclear is modulation is actually a smarter move. So instead of building one big large reactor, we would build, let's say we build 4 with the potential to add on and eventually have a dozen that equals one big reactor. So as the population grows, the demands for production energy, we would just add a new module of reactors to that facility, all on the same location, not siting it somewhere else. So you would get the siting permits to put on all of those reactors, but you would add them as you needed them. So it's actually a much smarter way to do it.
Are you actually reducing your risk as well because you don't have one large explosion? You might potentially have...
I think you do, and there's a couple ways that happens. One, it's a smaller isolated event. You don't have one large plant involved. Also, if you take down one of 12, you also haven't lost the base load. So you also maintain continuity. Now, you may have to take down 1 or 2 adjacent plants, depending on location, but quite often these are designed so that the controls are in place, or the barriers are in place so that you can have these multiples. Canada's actually kind of leading the way in North America. A gentleman I worked with up there at Ontario Power Generation is actually part of the team, and he recently told me that he was on the team to put in their small modular reactors. They're going away from their current design and actually going with an SMR. So very exciting.
Cool.
Others are looking at it around the world, and I think, to be honest, we'll go that way too. They're very expensive to build, but they can last up to 100 years plus. So there's some really interesting things that nuclear power can do that other power sources can't do. So at Argonne National Lab, I ended up qualifying a big variety of things, learned a lot of things, handled a lot of very high hazard work, including spent nuclear fuels. The reactor was shut down due to political reasons, and politics always plays a role. It's unfortunate because it was operating very good, but politics played a role, and we got caught up in it. So I went on to operate and start up, and actually was the first operator at the control panel to process our sodium. Now, if anybody knows anything about sodium burns in air and explodes in water. And we were going to use.
Is that the most friendly? Not the most friendly chemical then?
Yeah, it's a most reactive substance. So we were going to react it in a reactor, not a nuclear reactor, but a reaction vessel. And I got to tell you, I was a little nervous because we had this thick glass wall between me and it, and I didn't feel it was sufficient. But it was designed before I got there, so. It all went well. It did hop and pop a little bit, but we got it all done. We worked on that for about 2 years. We basically turned it into a benign substance and buried it, which was good. And then while I was working there, I got a job offer to go over to one of our other facilities. And it's the largest hot cell in the world. It's called the Hot Fuel Examination Facility. It's a gigantic facility. We have overhead cranes and manipulators and things all inside a hot cell.
Hot cell.
And you would die within seconds going in there. So the hot cell is basically, if you ever watch some of these shows where they're using manipulators and remote manipulators to do things on the other side of a glass wall. These walls were 4 feet thick of lead glass, and light would actually bend through them. It made me dizzy to first start working on them. It was
That's
one of the
crazy.
most interesting jobs I actually had. Nuclear operations is actually kind of boring. You sit there with the plans that nothing goes bad, and should it, your hair is going to be on fire, right? So
yeah.
But that job was it was very interesting. We worked on advanced nuclear fuels for reactors all across the world. We also worked on advanced materials, and we would do destructive and non-destructive testing, to keep it simple. It was very, very, very interesting work. I was finishing up my bachelor's degree at this time, and I got a job offer. Well, I got asked to put in for the safety professional job that was coming up. So we had a safety engineer job coming up, and I said, yeah, I think I'm ready to leave operations. I'd been in operations for 20 something years, working shift work and all those things that go along with operations. And I had about 25 or 27 years of operations. So I was ready for some change. And,
fair to say you knew what was going on at the sharp end.
Yeah. I had a handle on what people do on the floor. I'd been an electrical operator, mechanic. I was actually a mechanic in the Navy, so I had grease under my fingernails for about 8 years. So I understand that. So I went over to safety, and then I was over all of our nuclear facilities on that site, because the other safety professional didn't have a nuclear background. So he had a construction background, and I handled that, and he handled the other. And fast forward a couple years, and the Idaho National Lab ended up winning a big contract, and they wanted to consolidate everybody out there on our big nuclear site. So it's out on a desert here in Idaho. And they consolidated us under one contractor, and it became the Idaho National Lab, and Argon was melded into that system. I got asked to get involved in, and I volunteered for this piece of work known as human performance at the time. We called it Human Performance Improvement, HPI. So I love all the acronyms and all the names. Yeah. I may say one or the other, and I apologize. It's just sometimes that's in my head.
It's all good.
So I began to, I got trained up on this. I went to the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations in Atlanta, where Tony Mashera and some folks, and Tony's one of my co-authors on my book, had put together the principles of human performance and the tools, the error mitigation tools. And I went there and I got trained. Some of my staff got trained. I ended up eventually becoming the manager of our human performance group. And we had some folks from training. We had some folks with high risk backgrounds, and we had some folks that were part-time for us. And then I put together a training program at Idaho National Lab to produce in each of so we had a large groups of folks. We made everything from nuclear fuel to running nuclear reactors, to one site that made the tank armor for our M1 Abrams, our famous tanks. We used spent nuclear fuel to make that, all classified stuff, but very interesting. By the way, an interesting note there, that facility's inside a hangar. They were going to make a nuclear airplane, and before it was finished, someone said, what if it crashes? Oh yeah. I find that funny, because they spent millions of dollars working on a reactor design down in Knoxville, Tennessee, or Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and they built our facility. They actually built the hangar to put it in. They were putting it all together, and someone said, what's the worst thing that can happen? That's kind of an important question.
It is, isn't it? Maybe you should ask that before you spend millions of dollars actually developing it.
In the design phase, or the conceptual phase of this process. I just find it interesting they didn't ask that. I mean, I see, like, if it's going off into space, who cares? Around the Earth, that might be important. Yeah,
you can't guarantee where it's going to crash, if indeed it does crash.
Yeah, we just crashed a nuclear airplane in Paris. I think somebody'd be upset. So anyway, so I got involved in doing this, and we were also running an observation and coaching program. And in concert, we would teach both of these classes, get people qualified to do the observation and coaching. and then and it was a peer-to-peer coaching. It wasn't leadership
All right.
to
Yep.
subordinate type of coaching, which is actually, to me, the better approach. This was based on, I don't know if you heard of behavioral-based safety, BBS. It was based on those principles. I actually met Dr. Scott Geller. He came to my house. He's a wonderful man.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, I did a review on his next book after his first book, and he was very good. He was a good friend to me. I haven't been in touch with him in quite some time, but he was great.
Yeah, right.
Anyways,
it's unfortunate what's happened to BBS, really, isn't it? I mean, it's
yeah,
got a bit of a bad rap over the years, and I think that's, we could probably lay that at the feet of one or two corporations, but there are a lot of really great elements of BBS.
There is, yeah, and I would agree with you. There's things that came out of it that I thought were useful, and those artifacts did find their way into other things. So that's the good part.
Yeah.
It wasn't a complete failure, but I think the missed application was a bigger problem than
yes
concept.
Yeah.
So after I don't remember how many years I was the human performance manager there at Idaho National Lab, we put together a training program to qualify practitioners in the different organizations. So
Gotcha.
yeah, and that was very helpful, so that we had an expert kind of in-house who technically knew what was going on in that organization, and then also they had all the basic background that we would want a practitioner to have. And we put them through oral exams, written exam, everything. It was pretty rigorous. I kind of
over what kind of time scale was the training?
It was self-paced, so it was up to them. We had certain courses that we taught live. They needed to take all those. Then they had certain reading and take exams, books from the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. We had a Department of Energy and we were Department of Energy laboratory, so that's our governing body. In the commercial nuclear industry, there's the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that's over the civilian nuclear reactors, and the Department of Energy is over the government test facilities. So that they used to be one organization. They broke them into two back in the 50s or 60s. I forget when it was. But anyways, we had a contract with the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations to use all the INPO documents, and eventually someone at the Department of Energy actually put that material together and put out DOE handbooks 1 and 2. I don't know if you've seen those. Yeah,
I've got them. Yep.
Yeah, they're great books, and they're pretty much a duplicate of what happened at INPO. So it was wonderful that they allowed us to do that, and a lot of credit to the folks that were involved. I was asked to be involved in the review. I was too busy. I told them I cannot do this. So we were trying to be proactive, and of course you end up being reactive in that job a lot, because every time there's an event, an undesirable event, and there was human error involved, which is almost always, they said, let's get hold of Ron and see if his team can help us. So we say we're proactive, but we spend a lot of time with our firefighting gear on, putting on our turnout gear and going to war there to fight these fires.
But you were around at the time of the development of the DOE, the two handbooks there, because they're quite well known here in Australia as well. To be honest with you, it's been some of the foundational material. In relation to human performance and human organization performance, HPI, whatever you want to call it. That's some of the original, I suppose, documentation around all that, isn't it?
Yeah, INPO's documents weren't allowed to be released due to legal reasons. So when the Department of Energy produced these, we produced them with government funds, which is use taxpayer dollars. Then we have to make those things available. So that's why they're out there and available. And I'm glad they are, because it's helped a lot of organizations, I believe. It
has indeed. And it spawned a lot of creativity as well in taking them and adapting them for different industries and different countries and different cultures. And it's been almost like the soil with which everything's kind of blossomed out of, isn't it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's pretty amazing how far reaching. And I give a lot of credit to Tony Mashera. He was heavily involved in producing those documents and and working with teams of folks at INPO and in the commercial nuclear industry to produce some fantastic work. And, he based that a lot on Dr. Scott Geller's work, or not Geller, but Decker,
Sydney.
Dr. Eric Hallnagel, James Reason, those folks. So all the kind of the fathers of the work that we all profess. I don't like to take credit where credit's not due. I give my credit to these really brilliant men and women that superseded us or wrote the books on it. So
we're the same. We're just standing on the shoulders of giants, aren't we?
That's exactly right. So after a few years in that role, I had finished up my master's degree, and I have 2 certifications, one in emergency management. I've been involved from being a firefighter to being the on-scene commander, and then being the emergency manager. When all heck breaks loose out there at the nuclear site, I was the guy in charge. Now, there was a guy back somewhere else that wasn't directly directing the stuff, but I was the guy directing all that and went on. So that's a heavy load.
Is there anything you haven't done on these nuclear power plants?
No, not really. No. Got about 8 careers. I didn't tell you all the stuff I did before I went in the Navy. And then, so I got asked to go over to research, and I thought, well, heck, I haven't done that. Good segue. I haven't done that yet.
Let's give that a whirl.
Yeah, let's give it a whirl. So I went over and I interviewed, and I had a PhD that was working for me at the time, and he says, if you go, I'll go. And I said, well, let's go. So both him and I went over there and did some really interesting work for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and a variety of other folks. And we did some really interesting research in human performance at the time. One of the big projects I was involved in was looking at how to use modern technology to address human performance in a commercial nuclear power plant to help reduce costs, prevent human error, and increase the life expectancy of those nuclear reactors. Because if you treat them right, they're going to last longer, obviously. So I did
treat them right, they're more efficient and effective.
Yeah. So we were kind of projecting what technology was going to bring by looking at the latest technology and see, well, how could that be applied to both operations and maintenance in a commercial nuclear power plant? Wrote several papers on that subject. Those papers are out there and available on the internet as well. They're publicly available. And so the next job I took on was we also looked at how to improve nuclear power plant outages. So an outage runs about $1 million a day for one nuclear power plant. It's quite expensive. They're bringing in thousands of workers, and these extra workers all go to work on all the plant. Now, the big thing that kind of puts their hair on fire is emergent work. They got planned work, and then when they dig into it, they find that thing that's not right. And they're like, oh no, now that becomes critical path. So what we did is we went in and we looked at it from a research standpoint. What could we do? What technologies could we apply to that problem in a commercial nuclear power plant? Because they're so busy doing day-to-day stuff, they don't have time for research. That's not what they're there to do. So we came in and said, okay, what can we use? So we started looking at smart technologies, a way to communicate information more effectively. And not to get into the details of that, but it was a really interesting project. We won a big award for it. It's the first time any Department of Energy laboratory had won an award from this organization. So, put a little change in my pocket. It was nice. And then with that award, then that project was kind of tied up. What was interesting is we got published in Nuclear News. Then every nuclear power plant in the nation wanted us to come. Nuclear is this way. Nobody wants to be first, but everybody wants to be second.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking
about.
Nobody wants to
let somebody else test it first. And then once we know it works, we want it.
We want it. Yeah. And then everybody's begging us to come. But we went, and it didn't cost them anything except to buy the technology. And we wrote a report on it, said, here's what to do, laid out the roadmap. And we saved actually The cost avoidance just on that one, I forget how many, it was millions of dollars. The cost avoidance was. I'd have liked to have just 10% because that would have been a lot better chunk of change. But that's not what I got. So while I was doing that work, it was wrapping up that research work. My PhD friend and partner I've known for years, he was looking to retire, and we lovingly called him Dr. Bob. It was Bob Richards was his name. And Bob was a brilliant man in HOP, HRO, all this stuff that we love to talk about. And he was also a human factors research scientist. I mean, he was a smart guy.
Right.
And human factors to me was fairly new, and I had to learn things to be a human factors researcher. And he was leaving a project in my hands if I wanted it, working for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. What we were doing was collecting human performance data from the commercial nuclear reactor control rooms simulators. So they have a simulator for every one of these nuclear reactor types. And in order to keep these operators very sharp, these are full fidelity, full scale. You walk in there, you can't tell whether you're in the simulator or in the real reactor. That they're that good. So they go in there and they run a variety of scenarios, and then they debrief how the crew did. The debriefing data would go into an algorithm system, and we would collect that data for the different elements to, not to get too technical, but do high reliability analysis. It was basically to say, how reliable statistically was the human under these conditions?
Gotcha.
So currently the methodology on that has been expert based. If you ask 10 experts, you're going to get 10 answers.
Yep.
So what we were trying to use is statistically sound data, get enough data. And so our first project was in Taiwan, the nuclear power plants in Taiwan. So I got to go spend 2 weeks over there training their nuclear trainers at their four nuclear sites. It was fantastic.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty
I had
impressive.
actually gotten a job offer to go do what I'm currently doing, working with Ray Gonzalez and Daniel Wild. At the time, it was Ray Gonzalez with Hope Consulting. That was the consulting firm. And they had called me and said, hey, well, how would you like to go to work for us? I said, I'd love to. But I had made a commitment to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to go do this project. And I was the lead, and I was going to leave them hanging. And I did not want to do that.
Yeah.
Well, I was about to get on an airplane, and I got a phone call to say, would you like to come now? We really need you. And I said, yeah. So I sent a note to my boss and then one to my wife, and she said, what? you just what? So I quit. I didn't retire from there. I just quit. And I thought, if not now, when? This is my passion. I want to go back to it. I'd been 8 years as a researcher, been writing papers. I'd been successful. I had a lot of things I could hang my hat on to say, yeah, I did that. But as Ray Gonzalez says, he's one of my mentors and he's our chief executive officer in our company. He says, we save lives and livelihoods because of what we do. And passion for that for me is there. And I thought, you know what? I do want to go back to this. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I started to work for Hope Consulting and as a consultant. And then I posed to Ray that, what do you think about a business partner? A little defense in depth. What if something happens to you? Who carries the mantle? Or what if you want to go on vacation? You got a major project. How's it? And he started thinking about it. A couple days. Well, it wasn't even a couple days. The next morning, he said, let's talk about the details. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for Ray. He's a brilliant man, been in the industry for years, commercial nuclear, but now, like me in consulting, you go on to, you work with mining, you work with the oil and gas industry. We work with these other industries and, of course, nuclear, Department of Energy, commercial nuclear, weapons handling, a variety of things. You learn a lot from every one of them. There's a lot of interesting things. So kind of fast forward on where this went. So I become a business partner, and then a gentleman named Daniel Wilder, who owns Safety Instruct, and he gave me a call, and he LinkedIn messaged me. He said, hey, take a look at this and see what you think. And it was some link to some safety training he had. And I thought, oh, safety training. I got a master's degree in industrial safety. I do not want to look at some safety training, like regulatory safety training stuff. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's like eating sand to me. But
Yeah.
he bugged me so much. Eventually, I said, okay, I'll go look. And I watched it, and it was just on hearing protection. It was fantastic. I was like, okay, if I can be entertained in this little, I think it was maybe 10 minutes, and there were student interactions, a little quiz at the end. I thought, if I can be entertained by this, he must have some really good other things, because all the safety training I ever taken working for the Department of Energy was,
It's like pulling teeth, isn't it? Let's be
it's
honest.
horrible.
It's the
And
same.
no matter where I go, I have to take that training for that facility in order to have access to it. And it's the same stuff. It's like, read a whole bunch of garbage, answer this question, and then we're going to test you at the end. And it's read and try to memorize for a short period, long enough to test. And it's just terrible. I mean, it's just.
So when you come to Australia next month in June, we have the same approach regardless of which mine site people go to. If you've been to 100 mine sites and you go to another one, you have to do another 2 or 3 day induction. It can be that long, and it's exactly like you said. It's just PowerPoints. It's just looking at images, reading information which really may not even be pertinent to your role that you're going to, and then being tested on. Okay, so where is the fire exit in this particular building, or how many beeps of the alarm for this? And it's like, really? I'm going there for 3 hours to go and do a training course, and then I'm going home again. It's like,
it's painful.
Ridiculous. It is.
So what Daniel posed to me, he kind of says, "Hey, do you got time for a call?" I said, "Yeah. Let's talk, because I'm interested in what you're proposing." He says, "How would you like to work together to start developing some human organization performance video-based training?" Which fundamentally, the video-based training is uniquely different. It's real workers in the workplace with narration and key points coming up on the screen. And sometimes we use models, and we can model things and show things similar to a PowerPoint, but more video style versus clunky video PowerPoint. So we have a team of experts in Knoxville, Tennessee, that are videographers to people that do the development, and of course we narrate our work. And so I thought, well, this would be interesting. Let me introduce you to Ray Gonzalez, my business partner. And Ray happened to be going to Knoxville. I was actually working up in Canada at the time for Ontario Power, doing some consulting work up there for HOPE. And I said, "Ray, how would you like to go meet this guy?" I said, "I've been truly impressed by him." And Ray went over there. He had his family in the general area. And he says, "Yeah, I was going over there to see my daughter. I'll take a drive up." I think he was going to Memphis, Tennessee. So anyways, he went up there, met with Daniel, absolutely agreed. And fast forward, we got high reliability training, and that's our human organization performance training. We have safety instruct, which is all the regulatory based, what we call OSHA standard of regulation. And then we have our consulting firm, where we have a team of subject matter experts that we can call on, including ourselves, obviously, to support organizations with human beings. So we have consulting, HOP, and then we have our high reliability training. Thank you for putting that up. So this is our website, and we have a full suite of HOP training, from human performance fundamentals to the HOP tools, error mitigation tools, all video based. So someone doesn't have to have death by PowerPoint or sit in a classroom to get the fundamentals. So what we did is we just started with some of our proprietary training stuff, triggers training, which is visible cues that the bad things coming, that it's the indication that something's not right. Ray's the expert on this and wrote that training. It's been our actually most popular one. It's a powerful tool. We also have our coaching to enhance performance. It's a full 8-hour course to teach you to be a good field coach out doing observation and feedback. And then
Yep.
we also took our critical steps book and converted that as well. I worked with Jim Moranis and Tony Mashera, my co-authors, both brilliant men. And we worked together to turn that into video-based training, working with our technical team in Knoxville. And we also have a course that I developed called Precision Execution, which is fundamentally how to do better pre-work discussions and how
Gotcha.
to, it's based on that. A lot of the stuff in the critical steps, but it puts it into action of like, these are the things you need to do to have precision and execution, those things that must go right do if you follow this kind of prescribed process.
Gotcha.
So we've got a full suite of library content, and we're in a constant state of development. I'm developing a new one called Failsafe right now. I don't know if you've probably heard that term.
Yes,
and,
definitely.
In fact, we wrote about it pretty extensively in our book. I kind of major authored that section, and then of course Tony and Jim beat me up, and we made it better. That's what
it's always good. It's always good. Always good to have those critics that say, oh, you know, you need to look at this. This didn't come across right. You need to, you know, get that bit out, that bit of information out better, because then it helps refine it, doesn't it? It really does.
Yeah. So where the critical steps book came from.
Let's have a look at that, shall we? Just so we can.
Yeah.
Just,
Go ahead,
is there anything else? Is there anything else actually? While we're here, is there anything else?
Yeah.
On this page that...
There's something we're doing here that I think people are going to find very enlightening and very useful. So to me, one of the things we talked about is how to better get this information out there. And so we typically sell our content. You can buy individual courses, or you can buy the library access, and we have different libraries of content. You can get the fundamentals and the tools as one library. You can get our advanced courses, that sort of thing. And then, of course, we bundle the whole thing if you want to buy it all. And what we've typically found that's most helpful, and here's what I thought was most interesting. We didn't plan it this way, but it's something we discovered as we started working with organizations selling our content. One of my biggest challenges I had as the human performance manager, like I was talking about earlier, is I was always fighting fires. And they wanted me to come up with a corrective action to deal with some human error element of some event. Well, the challenge these folks have is putting that content together, getting it out, and doing it timely. So everything gets bogged down in the process. With this library, let's say it was a verification practices, and they were supposed to be doing a peer check. Someone's supposed to be checking you as you were going through the process. Well, you could immediately say, well, one of the corrective actions is we're going to, as the human performance group, or the HOP group, depending on what you call it, we're going to assign that to that organization or to the entire organization. And then we're going to give them the talking points. Now that you've retaken that course or taken it, let's talk about it and how that would have prevented this event had we done it this way. So they immediately have this corrective action in their back pocket and don't have to develop these things. They don't have to get someone up to speed to train it. We don't have to put a course together. We don't have to run it through the training program. We don't have to get all the yes sirs and yes ma'ams written all over it and then put it. You know how long all that stuff takes. It takes forever. So you already have approved content built by experts readily at your disposal. The other thing we offer, and we're working on this right now, is sometimes the folks already have a human performance program or HOP program, and they say, well, we love your tools, but we do it a very particular way. We say, okay, we can do a semi-custom and build that for you and take our content that does work for you, so many lessons, but the specifics of why you do it and when you do it and how you do it, we can put that in there, and we build that out at a very reasonable cost and much cheaper. To me, the big thing about what this type of training does for you, many of the organizations we go to work for have thousands of employees or hundreds of employees. And the challenge we always have had in HOP, in my opinion, is how do we get scalability? How do we? I
was just about to say the word on the tip of my tongue while you're talking is scalability.
That's it. And in fact, I did a little webinar on this at the COLA Community of Health and Organizational Learning I don't know if you're familiar with them. They're holding a conference in
in
somewhere in the United
Canada.
States. No, they're doing it in the United States, up and coming. Yeah, and I apologize. I'm not going this year, so I don't have it memorized where they're going. It was more recently in Colorado Springs. But anyways, what I wanted to talk about on scalability is that, let's say we can get this training out. Let's say you decide that you want everybody to do triggers training. You want to identify when to stop work because of these visible cues. Now, that's a powerful tool. And the nice thing about triggers training is that you don't have to know anything about HOP to take this course and have an immediate impact. So one of the things I think is most important for HOP, in order to convince senior leaders to invest more, because that's always your challenge, is to invest more into the organization, is you got to have a first win. Triggers training gives you that first win. You have an immediate behavior change. You start identifying the events you didn't have. Nobody's ever done that before. So it's not even a leading indicator, right? So we talk about leading indicators, lagging indicators. These are real-time indicators. In real time, we stopped an event because of the training we give these folks. It's a 5-module course. It's designed for everybody. We have a 6-module that's to help managers deal with the data that comes out of it. It's important data. It's not challenging data, but it's important data. It's actionable data. So what I love about this training, particularly, Ray is the mastermind behind it. And we used to teach it live, but we teach it this way, and we can train 2,000 people in a week.
Yeah.
That's what you want done. Or in 2 weeks, because it's module. We recommend 2 to 3 modules a week. Don't overburden people. And it's training on demand, which is even more important. Most of our training we get is you got to go sit down and you got to take it in a set time period, and you eat somebody's day up. Whether that's live or computer-based training, what we call CBTs. Not a fan of CBT, by the way. Video-based training is not a CBT. Don't want to confuse people with that. But it also, this process also gives you not just scalability, because you can scale to the number of people. You don't have to bring in someone like myself and spend, I'm not cheap. Let's say that.
Yeah.
I'm just teasing there. But it's not cheap to bring in a consultant ever, because it's the amount of time you got to have them there. You got to house them. You got to fly them there. You got to give them food, blah, blah, blah. So with this type of training, you cut costs down dramatically, price per seat, compared to a live consultant. Now, what that does for you as an organization is now you really do get to focus on being a human organizational performance leader, because you're not spending all your time in the classroom. That's what I was doing a lot as the manager. As the manager, I was teaching courses, because we had so many courses to teach, so many people to teach. We had 5,500 people. And we're trying to put them through this rigorous set of courses. That was also
as well, and sorry to interject there as well, but it just came to my mind. Not only do you have a huge amount of people to get through initially, but you also, in organizations that size, you have turnover, you have churn of staff. So then the next week you might have 5 people which haven't been on the course, and the next month you may have 25 people who haven't been on the course and may have to wait 12, 24 months until the organization
can afford until a month from now.
Exactly. Whereas with this, you can start them straight away on that journey.
Right. And you can make it part of their initial come in the door training. Let's say there's very specific things within the library. You say, everybody coming in the door, we're going to make sure they all do this. Triggers training, by the way, is one of those things. One of the big corporations we're working with, they have about 10,000 people, and they can decide who do they want to go to that course. And then they give them a deadline. Our system automatically sends them notifications, late notifications, sends to the supervisor, all that basic LMS, learning management system stuff. The other thing, we're upgrading the system, and I think that, well, let me finish with sustainability, and I'll wrap this up. So sustainability, the big benefit you get with this video-based training is it becomes sustainable. You're not relying on a cadre of certified trainers on a subject, which everybody has churn. Nobody stays in the same position very long these days.
Yep.
So maintaining that expertise, quite often managers are in the role for 2 to 5 years and they move on to something else. Well, they just became an expert and we put them into something else because they did really well. Well, now
Yep.
you've got a hole in your human organization performance program.
Yep.
With this process, you can get people up to speed very quickly. The speed of deployment is literally you give us the list and you're going to be able to start deploying and sending out notifications to take the training, and our system can handle it. So that to me is just that scalability and sustainability of the program. This is essential.
Actually, when you're going on about sustainability as well, something else just came to mind when you're talking about it. Yeah, you may have internal movement, people moving in departments, but also a problem that I've heard, especially here in Australia, and I'm sure it's not ubiquitous to Australia, I'm sure it's around the world, when you have leaders in certain positions who are HOP advocates, Safety 2, New View advocates, whatever it be, and then you get that performance and you get all that. But then as soon as that leader, whatever position you are, as soon as they move on externally to the organization, that initiative generally dies.
Yeah.
It goes with that leader. Whereas with this, that initiative stays in the organization because it's part of the bedrock of the training. So the new leader comes in and it almost becomes, part of the furniture, part of the furniture of the safety culture of the organization, because it's embedded within the systems that actually teach people what to do.
And not to put down any of my competitors, or the brilliant people doing great work, and I love many of them. They're good friends of mine, but nobody's doing it this way. Many of them will say we've got video-based training. So I go look and it's at best a talking head with a PowerPoint behind them. Well, as you know, and I know, unless I'm live there, watching someone talk about a PowerPoint is painful. Unless they're really, really good. And there are
even if you're live there.
Yeah.
Even if you're live there.
Even you're live, it's tough, right? Like, where's my coffee? So with this program, the self-pace, the cost effectiveness, the speed of delivery, the sustainability of the program, because you don't lose the program with the people as you get turnover, and then scalability, just being able to distribute it by the thousands. It's really a game changer in the world of HOP and high reliability organizations. Nobody's doing it this way. We're always looking for partners to help us, because getting this out to others, to me, is extremely important. And the challenge most people think when they go into HOP is, well, how am I going to get up to speed onto everything? First off, because you're new to role. Second, does that mean I got to be a trainer? Because I got to go train all these people. Well, they're going to look to you to be the trainer. They didn't hire you to be a trainer, but they're going to expect you to be a trainer. And so there's this dilemma the human organization performance folks run into is, how do I do both things? And then, of course, then you've got the fires that get lit every day, every week, every month, and you got to go put those out. And then you got the corrective actions. This also addresses that. It's a truly a game changer, in my opinion, in the world of human organization performance. So we're working on our HRO library now. That will be in the next piece as well. So we'll be working on the fundamentals and principles and practices of HROs as well.
Awesome. And just to close the loop as well. It's far too. I've not even had my morning coffee yet. And just to close the loop as well, is all this information. Is you're going to be talking about this when you come over to Australia and you're doing your workshop over in Queensland? Is it?
Yes.
Is this going to be a part of that demonstration?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the kind of the process that we've developed on video-based training and HRO, HOP. Yes. In fact, Daniel Wilder will actually speak to. Him and Ray helped me put together the sustainability, scalability webinar I did, which I wanted to get out to folks. Whether you use us, build it in-house, doesn't matter. This approach is a winning formula, and we know it is because it works extremely well.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So the next thing I'd love to talk about the book. If you've got
book,
a couple
definitely. Let's pull that up. This is the book you co-wrote with. Let me just grab it here. see whether my ability and technology is working today. Oh, look at that.
Perfect.
There we go.
So this is our landing page for our book, Critical Steps: Managing What Must Go Right in High Risk Operations.
Yep.
So, kind of the way, just to give you a quick history on the book background, where it came from. So Tony Michaud had written about this in his book called Risk-Based Thinking. If you want a fundamentals book on HOP, it is the fundamentals book.
Tony Michaud's book, Risk-Based Thinking.
It looks just like this one, but it's got a more greenish color to it. It's called Risk-Based Thinking. I highly recommend it as a fundamentals read for anybody interested in HOP and HRO. It is foundational. It's a dense book. It's got a lot of great information. One of the chapters was dedicated to this subject, and we took that chapter and made an entire book. You could do the same with every chapter in that book. But this is the chapter that we felt was most important. And Tony and I were working out in Wyoming at a large refinery out there, oil refinery. And we were carpooling back and forth from the hotel. We were doing some work there together, HOP work. And he saw me do a presentation there. And I give all my credit and knowledge on critical steps to Tony. When I was the human performance manager, I had hired him to come out and consult with me at Idaho National Lab. And I learned so much from him. Yeah, this is his book. It's a fantastic.
This is his book, yeah. It does look very similar. You're correct, yeah.
Yeah, he opened my eyes to I really thought I understood critical steps, and I was pinging on it. I was like on that subject at the lab, and I was trying to get everybody on board. And then Tony came and he blew my hair back, and I'm like, okay. Just when you think you know a subject, you meet the expert and you realize you don't know nothing.
Yeah, it's a whole Dunning-Kruger effect, isn't it?
I was like, oh, that was painful. So, but anyways, we're driving back and he saw my presentation and he said, how would you like to co-author my next book with me? I said, well, what's the subject? And he said, critical steps. And you seem to have a passion for it. I said, more than anything. So I got to write his coattails, and we would just started the work, and Tony, Jim Marinas and I used to work at Idaho National Lab together. He was instrumental in writing this book as well. He brought a lot of great subjects to the book. He is a consultant as well. He does his own consulting work, and occasionally he works with us. And Tony invited him to be the third author so that we would have different challenging thoughts, because we all have different backgrounds.
Yeah. And
we're all prior Navy nuclear, but Tony stayed in the commercial nuclear industry and worked at Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, and Jim worked at Department of Energy facilities. And I believe I don't believe he spent any time in a commercial. No, I believe he spent time at INPO as well. So Tony, Jim was at INPO as well. So commercial nuclear as well. So Jim kind of crosses both worlds. He did both areas. So we started this labor of love, and a year into it, it took us to write the basic book, and we sent it to our editor twice. And then as we worked our way through it, we realized there was a couple things that were missing. We added those in and made some changes. And it's amazing how many times you read your own book when you write it. And so we had divided up the subjects, and we basically all wrote 3 chapters, including the introduction. So that was 9 total elements of the book. Each chapter involves starting with a story. The power of stories, as you know, is very powerful in the
narrative.
And then we relate the subject in that chapter back to that story. Many of the stories, actually, that's why Tony brought me. I'm kind of a storyteller. You might have picked up on that, given the length of time we're doing this.
No,
and
that's all good.
He said, I'd love for you to write a story for the front end of this. Do you got one? I said, yes, I do. And so I wrote many of these. Some we actually went and got the stories because there were powerful stories out there we needed to embed in the book. But a lot of the other stories I actually wrote. And then we would do a summary at the end, what the key points were. And then we would do a little check for understanding, ask 3, 4, 5 questions, and then the answers are in the back. The other thing we put in this book, I think, was so essential for folks to have is an acronym of terms. So we've got this glossary of terms, rather, and this glossary, I said acronyms. Glossary,
you did. I was like,
Yeah.
how does that work?
I was thinking about acronyms earlier, HRO,
Yeah,
HOP. We put a glossary of terms at the end of this that's pretty extensive, and we've been adding to that glossary, Ray and I, as we continue to do our work in developing our HOPT or human performance courses, because we realized, well, that term's not in our definitions. So we add, and every course we make that list available. So you can download that list when you take one of our courses, so you have all those definitions. And I think the thing that, and Daniel Wilder picked up on this, the first human performance conference he went to, the COLA conference. He said, I noticed you guys all, and there was a bunch of us like HOP experts there, were using a term different ways. And I said, yeah, that's a problem. And I said, I love it that we have all these definitions and we're being consistent in our training content. So all of our content, we're consistent in using the term as it's applied in that course. So we don't necessarily call out the definition, because it kind of gets boring taking a course and someone's telling you the definition, unless it's so important that we do. We typically say, the definitions are here. You can look them up. There they are. But
well, language is so important, isn't it?
What's that?
I find language and definition are so important. I was talking to a gentleman the other day. His video is going to be released in a couple of weeks as well. He's in India, and we were talking about human factors. And I said, how did you get into human factors? He's got a master's from Lund University and all this kind of stuff. And what have you done to start embedding, those human elements within your workplace? And he said, can I stop you there? He said, you've mentioned human factors and you've mentioned human elements. And he says, and I know to you, they're very similar, but to me here in India, they are completely different. They mean completely different things. And it's so true. The language we use, the definitions we have for what we mean, especially when we abbreviate things, is so important, because it can mean different things to different people in different contexts all around the world.
Yeah, we always say, and it's one of my favorite sayings, and I apologize for not remembering where I got it from, but we like to think people into acting differently. And we've got to change the language to make them think differently. We've got to get them to understand these principles before we take them to the practices, because once we change your thoughts and your language you're using around these concepts, even the term critical step, I guarantee you could go find 10 definitions out there.
Definitely.
And one of the challenges in this definition here, I think is an important one. So I'll just read it real quickly, because it sets the foundation for a quick little story. Critical steps of human action that will trigger, not may, that's the term we often see, may, no, it will trigger immediate, irreversible, and intolerable harm. You have to have all three of those to an asset. That's people, equipment, reputation, the facility. If that action, that critical step, or a preceding action, we call those risk important actions. I would say going forward, I would use the term, or a risk important action is performed improperly. Risk important actions are actually where we typically fail. So the critical step, just to give you an example, the one I always like to give is, we're going to jump out of an airplane, and I say to you, I was a Navy guy. We don't jump out of airplanes. SEALs do it. Navy SEALs do it, but regular squids, we don't jump out of air. That's what we call ourselves, squids. But we don't jump out of airplanes. And I know a lot of people love doing that. And I'd ask people, you're going to pack a parachute. You got to put it on. You got to be trained. You got to get to elevation. You got to walk towards the door. You got to get the jump master's approval. You go out. You got to pull your chute. You got to have your backup chute, blah, blah, blah. What's the critical step? What's the most important thing in all those things? And what's most interesting, David, I won't test you on this, is if I
would say,
go ahead.
I would say pulling the cord for the parachute.
Oh, I like it. But you're not right, but we'll move on. If I asked 10 people, David, and I don't know who's listening, they were all coming up with different answers. If there's 1,000 people on there, let's hope you got a big broadcast on this. We're going to get different answers, and that's a problem, because this is high risk work. And in high risk work, you also get different answers. That's a problem. So classification of the actions we take when we're dealing with risk is so important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm going to talk about at this HRO in action workshop. The critical step here is jumping out of the plane. It's immediate. So immediate means it happens so quick, my actions won't reverse the consequence. So let's say my chute's not packed correctly and I jump out, there's no chance to fix the chute. I'm going to be pulling the backup chute if I've got one. It's irreversible. I can't get back in the airplane, and it's intolerable harm which occurs when I hit the ground.
Gotcha.
You can jump once without a good chute, but you're not doing it twice.
You don't need a parachute to skydive. You need a parachute to skydive twice.
That's exactly right, and that's where this comes from. So
the critical step, you could say, is the point of no return.
It's the point of no return. That's a simple way of thinking about it. Now, the important part here is all those other actions many people identified as risk important. And you were, by the way, in what we call a continuous critical step. And the only reason I said you were wrong, it was part of the critical step. So, gotcha. And I was just teasing you, by the way.
Hey, it's all good.
Yeah, the point of no return really had gotten when you went out the door. Right, and a lot of times they put you on a static course so it pulls your chute automatically. Different things, but let's just stay in with this part and not flying the airplane, just strictly the jumping part. Those risk important actions set you up for safe critical steps or failure at a critical step, harm, danger. So risk important actions are binary in nature. They're always reversible. I can pack a chute wrong. I can repack it wrong. I can repack it wrong 100 times, but it doesn't matter until I go out of that airplane. Interesting story. Yes. In human factors, they were doing research trying to understand why the Army was killing a bunch of folks during World War II, prepping them to be paratroopers. And they were like, we're killing them in training. We should not be killing them. We need to get them overseas. We need these guys. And so they started looking into it. And what they figured out is the parachute packers were not jumpers. So what they made them do, if I remember the fable correctly, and I'll call it a fable since I don't know all the details and facts, is that they had to jump randomly, pick a chute out of the pile and go make a jump.
Gotcha.
That failure rate went almost to zero.
Yeah, I bet it did. And
I would bet you they did some HOP tool things, self-checking, maybe a peer check, maybe the independent verification. I don't know. Yeah,
definitely.
But
it sounds very similar to when they moved the DuPont manager within the radius of damage that might be caused at the particular plant.
Yeah.
In order to be able to take safety more seriously. So him and his family had to move within the radius. And it was like, okay, well, now we need to take safety seriously. And it sounds very similar to that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And, and it really changed things. So just a quick story. So I was up doing observation and coaching training at this major facility. And I was there training a guy who was a nuclear operator trainer. So he was what we call a white shirt guy. Like he was button down white shirt like I've got on and, the big name tag. And he was a senior reactor operator. And we were just observing a guy teaching a class on fit tests to put on a respirator.
Yep.
And I sucked rubber a long time ago. I wear a goatee now, so I don't. Yeah. But I wore a respirator a long time. I understood what we were doing. And I looked at their checklist. Guess what they called everything they were doing to check that respirator?
What did they call it?
A critical step.
Every part was a critical step.
Everything was a critical step on that checklist. And I asked him, I said, what's your definition? And he gave it to me, and it's very nuclearized, but it's fundamentally this one. By the way, I got them to change their definition. They kept their nuclear elements, but they had some of this wrong. And
gotcha. If everything is critical, could you say that nothing's critical?
Well, they were all risk important actions. So making sure it has the right seal, make sure it has the right cartridge, make sure the rubber's good, make sure the straps are good, all these things, the mask is set in there, the glass is set good. But when is the critical step associated with putting on a respirator?
when you now, after hearing your first step, I'd say was when you walk into the dangerous environment.
That's it. That's where the hazard exists. That's where it's irreversible immediate harm, intolerable harm to you, the asset, because you breathe the uptake of whatever the thing was that you didn't want to have in your lungs.
Yeah.
So now you've got it. And see, you learn that in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's what we can do for organizations. Now, there's obviously more to all this, but fundamentally, if we can teach people that basic thing, to know when that point of no return is, it's not to say that a critical step is more important than anything else. It's not. In fact, the others are risk important, but that is the point of no return. So it's a definition, it's a point, it's a definitive point. And when you get good at this, when organizations get good at it, and I've watched this recently. So when I first started working with this organization, if I asked 10 people, they would get 10 different answers. Today, when I ask that question, I get one answer.
Yeah.
Which means they get this, right? Yeah. So that's important. So let me give you my airplane scenario, and I'll wrap this up on this subject. When an airline pilot goes to get in the plane, he doesn't check those thousands of risk important actions, does he? He doesn't have time.
No.
Because taking off is our critical step. It's the point of no return. If something bad's going to happen and it causes catastrophic event, a lot of lives lost, or many lives lost. But he does do something. He has a checklist, and that checklist is what we call risk important conditions. He's checking the risk important actions created safe conditions for that critical step taking off. Now we put all three pieces together. Risk important actions create risk important conditions that are bringing safety to the critical step. And they're not things to be avoided, these things. They're just defining what they are. They're not to be avoided. Critical steps, risk important actions, they're not to be avoided. They're the things that we have to do to handle the built-in hazards of the day-to-day work we do. We do craning operations, forklift operations, mining operations. All those things have all of these things I'm talking about in them. But what we don't have, if we sit down in a pre-work discussion or pre-job briefing with a team of folks, and we said, what's the most important thing we're going to do today? What's the one thing? We're going to get a bunch of different answers, depending on how we ask it. But once we learn this, we're going to get the exact same answer. And all it gives us is that endpoint that we know we're in.
Exactly. And I was just going to say that actually, when you mentioned, because it's called critical step doesn't mean it's the most important step. And it didn't, as soon as you said that, I thought to myself, no, you're right. Because what it does for me personally, it tells me where the critical point is. And therefore, everything prior to that actually becomes more important in my mind, because I don't want to get that critical step without making sure that everything prior to that is actually done and checked and is in place and working.
And you bring up a good point, David. 80% of our events are actually because of latent conditions, latent errors creating latent conditions, what we call landmines. So if we, and they're at risk important actions. So if we make an error at a risk important action and we don't discover the error using one of our verification methodologies or processes to ferret out that error, and we create an unsafe risk important condition and take the critical step, that's when an event occurs. That's what to me is the most interesting. This is also tied to event investigation. So one of the tools I developed was what we call HERA. It's our HOP, event reporting and analysis, and it's based
is this on your website?
Yeah, it's actually it's in our course curriculum. Is it showing up there? Yeah, right there. Go up one. HOP event report. That's it.
Gotcha.
So one of the things I found when I was going through writing this book with Tony and them is I did not find a good model that brought all the pieces together that actually make up an HOP event. In the old days, the old view was, human error. We found it, we pointed to it, we fixed the bad apple, we move on. I love Decker. I taught his work for quite some time as an adjunct professor at the University of Idaho and teaching accident investigation. But what I found was there was models For instance, the DOE model, the IMPO model on the anatomy of event, it's not accurate. And here's why I say that. What it doesn't bring into bear is 80% of our events are because of latent errors. That model is based on an active error, and it's also missing all the other components I was just talking about. Risk important action, risk important conditions, the critical step. Those things are not in that model, but that's exactly what occurs when an event occurs. And those risk important action failures are due to system weaknesses, what we call latent organizational weaknesses, that set up our error precursors, that put us in a position to make the error at the risk important action. So I built a model with Ray Gonzalez that shows all of these elements in a way. So you have to have two models. You have to have one for active errors and one for latent errors. And once you can't manage what you don't understand. You need to understand how these models work in order to manage risk. And so to me, that's one of the most important, when you're trying to write, you learn.
Yeah.
And I was learning a lot. I learned what I didn't know, and that was a whole pile of stuff. And I realized that Dr. Eric Holdnagel had an inverted pyramid that had some of the elements, and Tony Machera had some of the elements. And I kind of modeled those two things together and put some my own pieces in there, just in its minor pieces. But I think it's important we do understand these things. And in my presentation I'm going to do at this HRO and action workshop, I'm going to actually talk about that model and how to use that information to actually mitigate for events. So we are taking a proactive approach. So if you kind of scroll down that proactive risk management, you see in the middle of the blue box, that's it right there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's the subject I'll be talking about. A proactive approach to risk management. I mean, if you look at critical risk management at a mining facility as an example, what I'm going to talk about is exactly how to manage those concepts, because we've got a human who's fallible in a dynamic work environment with changing hazards. That's a recipe for the potential for harm. If we don't understand where the human is fallible, and this is not to blame the human, we set them up for that failure, as we all say, but we have to understand those elements. And we also need to know these things like critical steps, risk important actions, the conditions for safe operations. So once we start doing that, then we can say, okay, what do we need to put in place? And I'll end up talking about Dr. Eric Holdnagel in his book, Barriers and Accident Prevention. It's a wonderful book. I worked on a strategy called the CBS strategy, Controls, Barriers, and Safeguards. So controls direct human behavior. That's including our human performance tools. It can be a sign. It can be a senior a supervisor telling you to do something. It's the things that direct human behavior. Barriers are those physical things, or even having distance between us and, like you said, getting in the hazard zone. That's the physical things. And then the safeguards are those things like emergency fire support, fire suppression systems, emergency management, those sorts of things. So we need to look at every high risk activity that involves the potential for failure, include critical steps. We need to have a strong CBS strategy built into our pre-work discussions, these pre-job briefings, so that we are discussing, do we have the right controls? Are our barriers strong enough, sufficient enough for the hazard and the assets we're there to protect? So asset identification is critical. It's not just the human. What are their assets in the area? And then what are our safeguards? Are they sufficient? Not if we fail, but when we fail. So we change the mindset. Not what's the worst that can happen? What's the worst thing that can happen at a critical step for this activity? Because that's the point, where you have an uncontrolled release of energy, movement of mass, or transmission of information, depending on what type of work you're doing. That uncontrolled release is what causes the harm. So we have to put into place the CBS strategy with the plan to know that we have the potential, no matter what we do, to fail. Because I don't care what organization you go to. If you think you're going to tell me you're not going to have an event, I will disagree with you and take a wager any day. The reality is we got humans and we're fallible. We can't say it on one hand, humans are fallible, and then say we're going to prevent all events and we're going to prevent human error. You can't prevent human error. We say we have 5 to 7 an hour, but then we're going to say we're going to prevent them. I'm like, okay, come on.
I was going to ask you for your views and thoughts and opinions, and on the zero harm movement, your philosophy, but I think probably our time's probably better off spent talking about this particular workshop.
I'll just give you one word for it: crap. It's not reality, and that's the only reason I say. I'm not saying the effort isn't the right thing to do, but to think you're going to reach zero harm, zero events, zero human error it's literally impossible. In fact, some of our greatest inventions are because of human error. We can't. It's in our nature.
Well, there is that as well. I mean, we wouldn't get to where we were unless we had the ability to fail to a degree, and we learned from those.
Some of the best lessons, right?
Exactly. So we've covered a lot of ground in this talk today, which is amazing. And it's been fascinating hearing about your experience, about, your 27 years, you said, in the Navy, coming up through the nuclear ranks as well. They're probably doing almost every single job within that particular industry, and then what you've done since then. You've put together some fabulous training packages from what I can see, and approaches and philosophical approaches as well in relation to how organizations can go about implementing or sustaining these efforts within the organization as well. If people listen to this, which I hope they will be doing, and they're based over in the east of Australia. Obviously, we've got the dates up on the screen here, and this is going to be a public workshop. Is it going to be I suppose the question I was going to ask, is it ticketed? Is there a way that they need to reserve tickets, or can they just show up?
Yeah, so the HROinaction.com, it's all one word, HROinaction.com.
Let me get that website up, because I had it up before for Ray, but HRO in Action. And then we can show people where to go in order to be able to get these tickets.
Yeah, and you'll hear a lot of interesting things. We have a whole lot of folks. We've got 4 folks from Australia that will be speaking and supporting our workshop as well. Very
Josh
excited.
Bryant? Is that Josh?
Yeah, Josh Bryant.
And who else do you have? Steve Harvey.
Steve
I know
Harvey.
them both very well. Yep.
Georgina Poole.
Yep.
And if I'm trying to think. Oh, we've got Sandy Lamb coming from our organization. She also owns her own consulting firm. And we have, there's one more. I apologize. Anytime there's a list, let's see if it. Speakers. Scroll down. There she is, Jody Goodall. I apologize, Jody. And then, of course, my business partner, Daniel Wild, who will be speaking about how to leverage video-based training, both for compliance training and human resources and HOP and HRO. I think it's essential. And Sandy's also a wonderful speaker. Jody, I just watched her do a presentation just recently. I just watched it was a video, so it was recorded, but she is fantastic. All these folks that we're going to work with from Australia are fantastic. So really looking forward to it. We're also going to speak at the, do a meet and greet. I got a box of books that I ordered and bought to bring down. And so did Ray. Ray wrote his book as well on coaching to enhance performance. Yep. And we'll be doing book signing at the Safety Differently Book Club, I believe.
Book Club.
Yeah. So I'm very excited about that. Are you going to be there as well, David?
I'm not. I'm on the West Coast, but I copied Stephen Harvey and Josh Bryant. I've got the Safety Differently Book Club on the West Coast.
Okay. Do you have a copy of my book?
I don't have a copy of your book.
All right.
I don't. We'll have to
I'll
make
tell you
sure.
what I'll do, David. Josh has got that box of books. Tell him to hold one aside with your name on it, and I'll sign it and give it to you.
I'll message him as soon as we finish this recording. We'll get that as well.
Ron said, "Hold one for David."
Yeah. And if you're ever on the West Coast, it's difficult because for people here in Australia, they already know that the East Coast is where everything happens. That's the parties. That's where all the academics are, the practitioners are. And on the West Coast here, there's a handful of us, but it's not got the it hasn't got the culture, hasn't got the academic institutions that specialize. Griffith University, you've got the Safety Innovation Lab there with Sidney Decker. You've got several other universities specializing in safety as well over there, and obviously you've got a collection of some of the biggest safety personalities and practitioners as well. They're based over there, whereas over here we're a little bit thin on the ground, but we're getting there. So why don't we
invite me out? I love the backcountry. I just spent 5 days in the mountains of Idaho with two friends of mine from Canada. It snowed on us, rained on us 2 inches, and we chased some critters around the mountains. We had a good time. Dressed up like army guys in camouflage and having fun. But yeah, I love the backcountry. I've always wanted to come to Australia. So I'm not a city guy. I'm actually a country boy. I live on 10 acres. I've got horses. I do a lot of backcountry things, hiking, backpacking, mountain biking.
You're going to Brisbane, which is the city place. But if you ever want the country, WA is the place to come. I did mustering of cattle for about a year when I first came to Australia, and it was 10,000 head of cattle on 1 million acres, and we were basically living out of a swag, which is like a robust sleeping bag, for 3 months at a time.
You did what my son does.
building stockyards, using horses and motorbikes to muster the cattle. It was amazing. It was brutally hard, I've got to be honest with you. And if your son does that, then kudos to him, because he must be very fit to do it. But
yeah, he's got about 15,000 cattle on 500,000 acres, so it's a little less deserty than yours, but not by much. And
yeah, right, okay.
Him and his wife run the place with my 2 grandkids. So yeah, down in Nevada, it's an interesting thing he did. He's like, what did you call it? Cattle what?
It's mustering, we call it.
Mustering, yeah.
What's it called over there?
Well, you're a wrangler, or you're a cattleman, or a cowboy. We kind of use all those terms. So,
yeah, we've got roustabout as well. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, roustabout.
Yeah, that's a common term. Yeah.
Anyway, let's get back to this, because I could talk for everybody's kind of stuff. So this is the price for the tickets.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so we've got early bird. When does early bird finish? When does it go from on to?
I don't know. It may have a date on there. That might be a good question for Daniel.
Let me see if it's further into the details. Share this tab instead. Ticket, morning, pay safety. No.
I think it just comes down when the date. I think the early bird special just comes off the website when it's finished. If you see it up there, it's available.
Gotcha. Well, I'll put a link onto HRO in action to the particular page, to this particular page anyway, so people can navigate there straight away and jump on there to book their tickets, and put a link onto that. Also put a link on for the Critical Steps book, HOP, the high reliability training as well. We'll have that link on there. Would you be all right with me putting a link to your LinkedIn profile as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
LinkedIn profile. Is there anything we're missing on there? Anything else that people might need for further information?
So. Yeah, we're really looking forward to this. We look at this as a workshop, not training, because it's going to be a lot of collaboration, discussion. We really want people to come ask questions. The basic thing that we're doing here is we've got a lot of experience in high risk industries, and based on commercial nuclear, the Department of Energy, and the Department of Defense, the HOP and HRO principles and practices were ingrained in the way we've always done business. And we want to share those insights, not to say to do them exactly the same, but here's what we were doing before we did it and the results we had. Here's the results we now get. And here's where the thinking is, because it's an evolution. I mean, 10 years from now, what we said in the Critical Steps book, 75% of it will still be accurate, and 25% or 10% won't be. There's new things have come along. So I think that's going to be interesting. One of my big subjects I always like to talk about, and I apologize we didn't get into it here, but we often say and nobody really knows what this means to me. I haven't heard great answers to it. Workers are the solution.
Yeah.
So what the heck does that mean? Workers are the solution. And if you ask 10 leaders, you'd get 10 different answers relative to that question.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say there's one answer to it. The answer is that it's called adaptive capacity.
Mm-hmm.
It's despite the dysfunction of the organization, despite bad procedures, despite changing work environments, despite changing hazards in the environment, workers adapt and bring safety every day to every job deliberately because they want to go home.
Yep.
It's
yep.
that rare
it's not
moment things go
it's
bad.
not the document. It's not the document that's safe. It's not the equipment that's inherently safe per se. It's not, there's nothing that is that brings that safety. It's the person that's operating within that.
That's right.
And how they adapt. That's where the safety comes. It's an emergent system of the property, emergent property of the system that's brought by the humans in the system, isn't it?
That's right. And we do talk about this concept. And actually, Tony and I are actually working on a white paper on this subject that I think we want to get out to the public. And I'm not a big fan of conceptual information. I think you have to start with the concept to get to where you need to be. But I'm a practitioner. I come from the hands of work, flipping switches, turning things, using a wrench. I think it's important that in our world that, yes, the concepts are important, but if you can't tell me how I go apply this, so we're going to end every one of these workshop presentations with what you can do tomorrow. Our book does the same thing. Ray does the same thing in his book. That is the gift we're giving. Based on our experience, these are the things you can do tomorrow or right now when you go back to your organization to change the outcomes. And that's what I hope HOP leaders are doing out there, and HRO leaders, is being practical. Don't just talk about the concepts, but take that to a practical solution, apply those concepts. There's a lot of really smart people that wrote the concepts. I get them, but not many of them deliver. Give me a tangible thing I can sink my teeth into to do something. And that's why we wrote this Critical Steps book. It is a practitioner's guide to managing risk.
And that's a very hot topic at the moment here in Australia, and I'm sure it is around the world as well. With regards to, I understand the philosophy, I understand the conceptualization. Give me something concrete to take away, to use, to practice, and that's a very pertinent topic here in Australia at the moment.
Well, that's why we also call this workshop HRO in action. It's the actions we're going to leave you with. We're going to leave you with some ideas of how to go change things, and then we'll give you some resources. Couple of things, if folks reach out to me on LinkedIn, I've got a reading list that starts with a beginners, intermediate, and advanced reading list on these subjects. I think it's important that we stay up to date. And there's some folks that are looking for some advanced stuff. One of the things we did in our book, there's in the neighborhood of 15 to 25 or 30 citations in each chapter. We make sure we give credit where credit's due. I think it's essential to do that.
It's evidence-based.
What's that?
So it's evidence-based.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that it wasn't just off the cuff. We were basing on a whole bunch of different books and expertise and papers and different things. So I think readers will enjoy that.
Awesome. Well, if it's all right with yourself, either yourself or one of your two partners, after you've had this event here in Queensland, come back on and discuss, what you learned from the event, how it was received, anything you took away from, the context of these types of discussions here in Australia. I think that might be interesting conversation as well to have. So please feel free to reach out, and we'll get you back on and do a bit of a debrief as to what you thought about coming over to Australia.
Yeah, the shared learnings I think will be both at the book club as well as the conference or the workshop. I think it's going to be powerful. I love meeting people and sharing ideas, and then you find out that thing you held so dear is not quite right. And I don't mind those things. I like to learn, so I can be proven wrong.
It's what I like to call being poked in the axioms. You've got some axiomatic truth, and and suddenly you find out that it's not, it isn't so solid a ground as what you thought it was, and you've been standing on this whole time, and then that gets whipped out from underneath you. But it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, Ron. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's very much appreciated, and we've covered, as I said, we've covered a lot of ground. We've got a lot of information for people. There's going to be a lot of links for people to be able to go and get further information, to dig around, get in contact, and hopefully come and see you and your two partners, Ray and Daniel, at the workshop over there in Queensland, 26th, 27th, I believe it is, of June. So a lot of information out there. We'll get that out as soon as we can. Probably going to be out. I've got a few things I need to do on the channel this weekend. There's a few channel partners which I've come on board, so I need to amend a few things. But then I'm looking at getting obviously yours, Daniel's, and Ray's video out as soon as possible next week, so we can start drumming up some interest for this workshop that you've got going over there. But fabulous speaking to you. If you could hang around for just a moment, I'm just going to say goodbye to the watchers and the listeners, and then I'll come back and see you. But thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, that was Ron Ferris from High Reliability Training, and from the group of the organizations who are going to be in Queensland, as we mentioned, later on in June, 26th, 27th of June. If you're in those areas and you want to know more about HOP, HRO, and some, as Ron mentioned, learn some practical tools that you can take away to actually start using within your organizations, jump on over, book a ticket, and get in there, and get the book as well, Critical Steps. It's all going to be there. I'm just kind of still reeling at the moment. There's so much information. It was a great chat having Ron on, talking about his history and talking about all his experiences. So I'll leave you with that. We've gone through an hour and a half, which is just goes to show how much information we've been going over. But thank you again, everyone, for subscribing. Very much appreciated, and I look forward to bringing you more videos in the future. Take care, everyone.